Zelensky continues attempting to maximize the output from the most fervent Euro-vultures. On November 17th in Paris, he, alongside French President Emmanuel Macron, signed a 10-year agreement contemplating the purchase of 100 multi-purpose Rafale combat aircraft and 8 in-development SAM-PT air defense systems from the French. Zelensky hastened to call the document historic. Basically, I think he's somewhat right. It seems to me that it is a document that will remain in history because calling it a deal doesn't quite fit. More like a declaration of intent. The Kiev regime doesn't have the money for such a huge purchase. We might be talking about 20 billion euros, and Paris doesn't have the claimed amount of equipment. So, it's a fascinating virtual deal. One party lacks the money, the other doesn't have the goods, yet they have seemingly agreed on something for a future time. Judging by all appearances, we are witnessing one of the biggest scams in modern history. This is, I must say, with the French side understanding that whatever is supplied, if anything ever gets supplied from this deal or what's being supplied now, gets destroyed by the Russian Federation, as it is detrimental to us and threatening our security. Norwegia's newspaper Aftenposten published a report by this newspaper's subjournalist in Ukraine from the city of Izium. The report came from Izium, where a soldier from the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces spoke about the demotivating effect on Ukrainian frontline soldiers due to the mass exodus of Ukrainians aged 18 to 22 abroad. This Azov fighter, from the very Azov, which is banned and considered an extremist terrorist organization, and now part of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, called on Norway and other European countries to return these people home, if not for dispatch to the battlefield, at least for work and life. Quote, "Otherwise, who and what are we fighting for?" That's precisely the question to this very interviewee. Pose that question to yourselves, citizens of Ukraine, who and for what are you fighting? Solely for one reason, for Zelensky to fill his pockets and those of his close associates, as well as laundering those same money for those in the West who send them to him. This is no longer just a corruption scandal. It is, first and foremost, yet another exposed mafia bloody abscess on laundering funds, on not just stealing, but global misappropriation of millions, and in truth, billions dollars, on maldistribution of the weaponry submitted and selling it on black markets. It's another exposed abscess that has already led to a political collapse in Ukraine and beyond. Incidentally, the waves of this political upheaval are reaching even those countries that supplied the Kiev regime with weapons and money without any controls, checks, audits, or accounting. On November 19th, the Polish Foreign Ministry announced that it was revoking its consent for the Russian Consulate General in Dansk to operate. The Russian consular office must be closed by December 23rd, and all its employees must leave Poland. Earlier, in November 2024 and June 2025, at the request of the Polish authorities, the Russian Consulate General in Poznan and Krakow ceased operations. We view this latest hostile move by the Polish authorities as a manifestation of a deliberate policy to destroy bilateral relations against the backdrop of rampant Russophobia in Poland. Naturally, the Russian side will respond in kind to these actions by significantly limiting the Polish consular diplomatic presence in our country. I have seen these statements about how they sense that the enemy is coming, but they do not name it, and this enemy is an unnamed adversary. As we say, when it seems necessary, one must cross oneself. The only question is whether they have a cross, given what the Polish elites are doing today. We can see how they are directly intimidating their own population. They are intimidating ordinary people with threats that basically do not exist in reality. I just want to say that if they are scaring people with Russia, then they should immediately add a footnote, or say outright that it is Warsaw that is severing relations with Russia. Now they have closed another consulate. Who initiated this? Was it Russia? No, of course not. Who closed the consulate before that? Of course, it was Warsaw. It is widely acknowledged that the crimes committed by the Nazis during World War II are not subject to any limitations period. Unfortunately, for several years now, we have been witnessing unscrupulous attempts to rewrite history, to consign the lessons of the Nuremberg trials to oblivion, and to denigrate the actions of the Soviet Union and the Red Army. Against this backdrop, neo-Nazi movements are rapidly gaining ground in Europe. Perhaps Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, is unaware of this, but we are only taking retaliatory measures. When it comes to banning 30 Japanese citizens from entering Russia, these are retaliatory measures. I saw that they were surprised that Japanese diplomats were included in these lists of banned individuals. I am sorry, but Russian diplomats are subject to Japanese sanctions. Why were they not surprised by this before? We simply took retaliatory measures. Judging by the public statements of the head of the new Japanese administration, Tokyo's unfriendly policy towards Russia continues, despite the opinions of a number of sensible politicians in that country, including those with experience as Prime Minister, that such a destructive approach is detrimental to Japan itself. As you know, our position on the situation in bilateral relations remains unchanged. The restoration of dialogue with Tokyo is possible only if Japan renounces its current anti-Russian line, not in words but in deeds, ceases its attempts to undermine Russian-Japanese cooperation, and takes concrete practical steps demonstrating the Japanese government's serious intention to thaw bilateral relations. We have not received any response from the British authorities, or from any of their departments, to the statement made by the Russian Federal Security Service on November 11th about the suppression of a large-scale provocation by the main intelligence directorate and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and their British supervisors. To date, there has been no response. You see how convenient it is? You can just ignore it. This is not surprising, because the British traditionally refrain from commenting on topics that are inconvenient for them. Incidentally, there were no questions from Bloomberg or requests from the BBC, as they like to talk about Bucha and so on. Here, they see and hear nothing. They are not interested. Why? Because these are obvious failures of the British special services.